This is The Baseline, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. Welcome, everybody. You're tuned to The Baseline. Callie Warrenshaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. Man, so much is happening, and it's around that time of the year. I've been saying it for the last couple of weeks, man. There's no other greater time of this season, especially for the NBA, because it's the Christmas Day games rolling right around the corner, right? And so, obviously, we're getting to the new year, brand new things happening. But also, the world of the NBA is turning the corner, man. We're seeing teams that were on the bottom rung of the ladder starting to push their way back to the top of the pack. We're seeing the teams who came out of the gate hot starting to fall back a little bit. So are things now to a sense of normalcy? You know, I got to bring in my right-hand man, www.shawsports.net, Big Kahuna PNC, my man, Mr. Warren Shaw, to help me bring levity to that question. Mr. Shaw, is things coming back to, per se, normal in the NBA ethos?
In a lot of ways, yes. In a lot of ways, maybe we're still seeing some anomalies, but I think some teams that started off hot, starting to cool. I think some teams that started off slow, starting to, get hot. So in essence, you're kind of meeting in the middle right now and getting kind of what the mean is supposed to ultimately be. But I love it, and I think as you watch the ebbs and flows of the association kind of going throughout the course of a regular season, these are the type of things that keep you interested. And it's like, all right, well, now is this a new hot team or is this a new hot player? I just love the way that the season is gone. At the end of the day, it kind of screams to the conversation we had to begin the year, where there was going to be a lot of parity and a lot of things being very even across each conference, the Eastern and Western Conference, both being very, very competitive. So yeah, I love what we're seeing here right now too. And I think this is the norm where we're going to see a level of competitiveness that is kind of streamlined, kind of in the middle for all teams involved.
Yeah, man, I am super excited because it's setting the table. I think that's what it comes down to. You have a boatload of games that are going to happen in between the month of January and February. And while a lot of people are probably going to be looking forward to NBA All-Star Weekend, I think what this is also allowing us to do is to see, which teams are going to start making their push to start really answering those questions about whether or not they're going to be buyers and sellers by the time they get to the trade deadline, right? And so it's funny because I'm sure we're going to have a conversation about whether or not, some of these teams are going to be keeping it trill, or they're just they're going to basically be no shows, right? And so I think a lot of what we're going to see as far as moves being made is going to be predicated off of whether or not teams are sincerely trying to make that push. Are teams like the Pacers and the Kings buyers and sellers and stuff? So it's going to be a really exciting time because I don't know if we factored in that many teams to be in the mix by this time of the year, as far as being in some sort of contention to make a playoff push. But the playoff pushes typically we say it happens at the trade deadline. No. I think right about now is when we start seeing these teams trying to make that surge. If their schedule favors them, they want to be taking advantage of it to see clearly if whether or not they're going to be in contention. So really exciting stuff. There are two teams that we will be talking about because it looks like they are striking the iron crazy hot right now. And so the question I think that's going to be lingering is it viable? Are these guys contenders? Are they serious? Are we really feeling the Knicks and the Brooklyn Nets? So we will be discussing them in our segment of the breakdown. Good stuff there. And obviously we got some news and notes that we got to go over with you. As always, be sure to get my man Shaw at Shaw Sports NBA. Get at me at Game Fangs Lee. The show's Twitter handle at NBA Baseline, available on all the major platforms. You know where to find us. Just go to the Baseline as the search engine. And as always, add us on. You can always catch the Baseline at www.thebaselinenba.com, where we got all of the good stuff happening, along with our peoples from the 19 Media Group family. So we always encourage you guys to go to 19mediagroup.com, check out the plethora of shows that are out there and the great content and the great people who are putting out that content. The 19 Media Group family be running these content streets. Coming up, Sean and I are going to break down some of the stuff that's happening in the association, and then you don't want to miss out on our conversation about whether or not the Knicks and the Nets are really embracing, quote unquote, that New York state of mind here on the Baseline.
This awesome show that you are listening to is sponsored by Rich Kid Money Bear Clothing. The Bronx-based company represents 1990s streetwear with a modern twist. Rich Kid offers high-end quality clothing at reasonable prices. They have t-shirts, hoodies, sweatsuits, and more for men, women, and kids like me. You can check them out at richkidmoneybear.com and you can use the code 19media for a 15% discount. Okay, back to the show. And as always, this is a 19 Media Group presentation.
All right. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw, Baseline NBA Podcast. Let's get through some of these news and notes happening in the association. Shaw, Steph Curry is on the shelf due to an apparent shoulder injury. They estimating he's going to be out for a few weeks, so basically more than a month. With the way that the Warriors are struggling, Shaw, how deep of a concern should you be, if not a Warriors fan, but anybody who is a fan of the Warriors being relevant in the Western Conference?
Well, with the start that they had, that wasn't as championship level as I think they would have liked. This is pretty significant. Jordan Poole is, he got paid the bag over the course of the summer, so should presumably be able to fill in. But I mean, nobody does what Steph does, and just in terms of the gravity that he carries on the floor. I think they'll probably hover, just about around or maybe right below 500, which it probably is about as good as you can expect for that during that time period. But if they're, 4 or 5 games below 500 during that time period, then, they're going to have some serious problems and trying to figure out a way to kind of dig themselves out of that hole. So it hasn't been amazing for them to begin the year. And now this is another setback. If the playoffs started today, they would be below the play-in game. So I just think they got to figure out ways to continue to get Clay back to his normal self. Jordan Poole being able to step in. And as you alluded to earlier in the season, the pickup of Dante DiVincenzo was so massive for them. Obviously spelling Gary Payton the third. With DiVincenzo, he gives them a little bit of offensive viability that Gary Payton didn't give them, while maybe sacrificing just a hair on the defensive side. So I think they'll be okay. But again, they're going to have to get their ducks in a row here in essence to kind of stay afloat until Steph comes back in the Western Conference.
If this doesn't become a wake-up call that the Warriors have to get back to being a better defensive team, I don't know what it's going to take, because it's not even so much the fact that you're saying, okay, well, now that Steph Curry is gone and he's obviously your MVP, I just feel like they just haven't played good defense. They really just haven't. And until they get to that point, until they start getting their role players to help buy into whatever the defensive scheme is for this team, because I be honest with you, it's really hard to see where that defensive effort is coming from, where that defensive energy is coming from. It's not, I don't think it's coming anymore from the Draymond Greens and the Klay Thompsons. I think these guys are they're playing through their legacy, so to speak, right? The essence of what makes them great players, rather than collectively pooling what they do, their intellect, their IQ, and feeding it into some of these young guys, these role players, and showing them what it's like to be a part of a championship caliber type team. Not seeing it. It's not translating. And I think that type of fragmented approach, kind of everyone just kind of doing what they feel like or whatever, it's starting to catch up with them. Now, maybe because Steph Curry is gone and he's been the glue for the last 3-4 years, it's a wake-up call for these guys to really own this and kind of hone back in on what's made the Warriors collectively a great team. But I tell you right now, if they don't pick it up defensively, which is prime when you don't have your great, your consistent and your most dynamic scorer on the floor, if you don't pick it up defensively, I don't think it cures anything with what's going to happen to this team. This team will more likely make the playoffs, but there's nothing that's going to give me confidence that they're going to bounce whoever they play against in the first round, right? Like it's just not going to happen. So it'll be interesting to see what they do in this time frame, but I hope the focus is them to become a better team defensively, because I think they can always find their offense through Steve Kerr and the plethora of offensive talent that they've got out there.
Let me just say this one thing real quick. I think another note to mention here is obviously the loss of Wiggins and the time that he's been out as well. So he helps them on both sides of the basketball. So if he can come back, in the middle of this Curry outage, if you will, that gives them some long-term viability, I think, on the defensive side, especially on the perimeter, because you're asking Clay and Poole and those guys to maybe do a little bit more on that side than they're maybe capable of. Wiggins comes back, he can definitely help shore things up, and then Looney and Draymond can lock things down on the front court side. So the loss of Wiggins is also very important too.
Yeah, good point. Good point there. All right, Anthony Davis, he's out indefinitely. Well, you knew that this was coming, right? Like, we can't have a conversation about the greatness of Anthony Davis and it quote unquote MVP like type season without him suffering some kind of significant injury or some type of injury that's going to sideline him for an extended period of time. So,
Yeah.
with that being said, Shaw, now that we have, kind of ripped the Band-Aid off, so to speak, about this wound that we continue to keep, kind of hovering and covering up, this premonition, this idea about, Anthony Davis being an MVP, contender, whatever the case may be. Can we stop that and just say, if you want the Lakers to be championship caliber, you need a healthy Anthony Davis?
Well, for sure. Yeah, they can absolutely have no chance of like real viability in the Western Conference without his being present offensively and defensively, as a guy who can even pass the ball a little bit too, from the pinch post or even the elbows a little bit. It's been really, really, it sucks. I think as an NBA fan, obviously we have no love for the Lakers per se, specifically in our own fandom, but you wanted to see AD come back and,
Oh, we
kind
got
of
love for
continue
the
you guys
Lakers.
for him.
We got love for the Lakers. We just love to hate them. That's all.
But I think I just want to see AD be healthy. So
Yeah.
when I saw the news, I was like, man, I'm not going to put out anything snarky. Just like, oh, hope he gets back, man. Because, he was having an amazing, amazing bounce back season. And now to see that just kind of go awry here in typical fashion, it's very easy to kind of point the fingers at the situation like, oh, he always gets hurt. And that's not wrong. But I think, you were hoping it was going to feel and be different this year because he was off to such an amazing start, really blistering the league in a way that we haven't seen. Not even his first season, in the bubble season, like that when this is Pelicans AD out here really dominating, putting up gaudy numbers. So yeah, I just hope he gets back soon, man, because the Lakers need him. And Thomas Bryant and company, they cool and all, but they're not going to allow the Western Lakers to usurp anybody in the Western Conference.
I think what it does is it really challenges Darvin Ham and what I think he's going to have to do in order to keep the Lakers above water while Anthony Davis is on the mend. And it's kind of unfortunate because, listen, I like Darvin Ham. I think he's done a phenomenal job. And when the NBA is always for the better when the Lakers are relevant. What I don't want to see and what I'm hoping is not going to happen is these guys hang their heads so much on what Anthony Davis has given to them that they kind of just, they barely keep themselves afloat over this time period rather than really still challenging the status quo and hanging in there, being competitive and, maybe knocking off a couple of teams, regardless of whether or not we're going to say that the Lakers, are going to be among the playoff contending teams or whatever the case may be. I don't think it would have changed much of anything because this team is still an up and down type of team. But again, to have a MVP caliber Anthony Davis will always make the Lakers a relevantly challenging basketball team, especially with the way that the talent has been laid out, across the board. When you've got the Pelicans, when you've got the Grizzlies, when you've got the Jazz, you've got all of these dynamic teams. But the one thing that they cannot account for and they don't have a matchup for is a healthy Anthony Davis when he's on his ish,
Yeah, real talk.
All right, exactly. So, all right, so let's go ahead and move things along. Joe Ingles is expected to make his Milwaukee Bucks debut. Aussie, Aussie, Aussie. Oi, oi, oi.
That's your guy, man.
That's my guy.
I remember, a couple of years ago, Joe Ingles was your pick for, I think,
Most
first time
improved
All-Star or most improved, something like that too.
Yeah, one of
You're
those.
definitely on the Joe Ingles train. And while this is a move that a lot of people, it just kind of went under the radar over the summer, but I was like, yo, that's mad significant for the Bucks, especially with the talent that they already have. He's a guy who, can play a little defense, can do a little play creation, obviously can shoot the three ball here. Just a solid addition, I think, for this Bucks team who was already kind of rolling. So, and those nights where Giannis and Drew Holiday and even Chris Middleton coming off his injury, when those guys need to take some time off, getting Ingles back, and he's going to have to work his way back. Let's say he's not going to come out here and play 25, 30 minutes here, understanding. But as the season wears on, where now, those are Grayson Allen's minutes. No, those will be Joe Ingles' minutes. And I think it's just an upgrade. And there's nothing against Grayson Allen. So to me, I think the Bucks roster is incredibly balanced. I think this is a really great move that, again, just kind of went under the radar. I'm really excited to see what he's going to be able to do here, to continue to bring the Bucks to a level of contention that we think is kind of probably be NBA championship level.
We almost likened this with when the Celtics got Danilo Gallinari. We felt like when the Celtics signed Gallinari, they're like, oh, that's going to be a problem. because if the Celtics have figured out, how offensively effective they can truly be when having a legit shooter out there to keep other teams honest, it's just opening up the floodgates for Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown. And I think the same thing can be said for a guy like Joe Ingles, because I think the NBA has caught up a little bit with the way that Budenholzer utilizes Giannis. I think I'm seeing a lot more or too much of Giannis doing the point forward thing, and I get it. When you have such a dominant force of someone with his caliber, him playing at the speed that he does, and with the quote unquote violence that he does, it's kind of hard not to lean on that whenever you feel like it. But I do think that teams are preparing for that. I think teams have figured out a way to neutralize it enough to keep themselves competitive and put the onus on the rest of these other guys to come out there and win those games that typically you would ask Giannis to do. And until Chris Middleton comes back fully healthy, until the depth, the bench is become more consistent, because right now you're only really relying on Portis. They rely a lot heavily on Matthews and those guys, and I'm not saying that they're not going to contribute, but I know
Javon Carter and people like
Javon
that.
Carter. It's like I can't see that as what you're relying on during the regular season. Maybe during the postseason, but by then I think Budenholzer already figured out how deep he wants to go with his lineup. A guy like Joe Ingles with that kind of size and that kind of passing ability and that shooting ability and that grit, that's just added reinforcement to the front line that's going to make them even more dangerous. And I will say this: if Ingles is even a hair of what he represented when he played as a Utah Jazz, if you're the Boston Celtics, if you're the Brooklyn Nets, if you're the Philadelphia 76ers, you better be making sure that your front court is from a height perspective is able to match up with that, because that's a lot of size, man. That's a lot of size that they're going to have.
And these teams, they can't rest on their laurels, right? Milwaukee did the work in the summer. Boston feels like they kind of did as well too. Obviously, the Gallinari thing is done for them for the entirety of the year, but bringing in Brogdon as well. Brooklyn has a lot of guys. They're still working TJ Warren back into the fold there too. So the Heat haven't played particularly great basketball, but I feel like they're probably going to make another move at some point. So Eastern Conference, like I said, is loaded, as we said in the outset of this situation. But I think everybody is playing catch up to what Milwaukee has, despite now they're actually first in the Eastern Conference as we record. But I think, to me, they're clearly the best team. Obviously, they've done it before. Again, to be able to have, as you alluded to, the size that they have the defense that's just ridiculous. And an MVP, perennial MVP candidate in Giannis. It's really exciting to see Milwaukee, kind of be at this level and sustaining it. And I think the rest of the Eastern Conference has a lot of work to do if they're going to really take this Bucks team out in the playoffs.
Absolutely. You're tuned to The Baseline. Callie Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA, going through some news and notes in the association. So last thing that I think we want to make sure that we highlight, for our listeners, is the NBA's, intentions to rename the trophy awards. So renaming the MVP award, it'll be called the Michael Jordan MVP award. And when you go through the line, Shaw, like, I don't know where you are with it. I mean, I guess I'm completely for it, because the idea is really to acknowledge the legends. But man, I often feel like sometimes, man, you move it in a very scary space, so to speak, because I just feel like you could be closing off a sector or a generation of people if you don't put the right people in mind for those things. Like the people you can't ignore, the Bill Russells, the Kareem Abdul-Jabbars, like guys like that are like quote unquote the Mount Rushmores of. I get it, but man, I tell you, man, it irks me sometimes, because I feel like it's like, are we changing it because that's what we should do, or are we changing it because that's what we're being forced to do?
Well, I don't think they were forced into anything. This just allows them to secure potentially more bag. Really, I think it's naming these after historical figures that some of our generation will know. Some people younger than us are not going to remember, Havlicek and people like that. However, I think, as I said on Twitter, Kia is going to jump all over the opportunity to sponsor the Michael Jordan MVP award, Google, Microsoft, all those situations. So the NBA, allows their brand partner now to potentially have even deeper level association with some of the legendary names that are out there. And the conversation about all the things that are going out there, like Kareem Abdul-Jabbar already has a citizenship award. Bill Russell has the Finals MVP kind of after his name as well too. So some of those legends have already been kind of taken, unless you're going to switch those around to kind of add it into these new name situations here for the league. But in general, I think this is just a business decision more than anything else, and they can say it's also to try to honor their greats. But I think it serves a dual purpose. But I think the ultimate goal here is really so that they can secure more sponsorships with the naming of these awards with historical figures that everybody knows and loves.
It won't be long before we have an all-decade award. I really feel, no, I'm serious. Like, I really feel like we're going to get to a point where people are going to want to acknowledge, a player, a guy who maybe, they didn't live up to, exactly the level of a LeBron James, but in the decade that they've played, they were, their name was mentioned almost as equally. And it's just a way of saying, oh, okay, more sponsorship, more acknowledgement, more discussions, more talk. Like, I'm just waiting for that to happen. Just waiting for that other shoe to drop, bro. So just letting you know.
I'm on notice.
You're our notice. You're tuned to The Baseline. Callie, Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. Coming up, Shaw and I, in our segment of The Breakdown, we're going to be talking about the two hottest teams, and they're out of New York City. No, we're not talking about the Mets and the Yankees. That's a foregone conclusion. We're going to actually be talking about the New York Knicks and the Brooklyn Nets. Are they exactly what New York needs? Can they finally buy into the idea that New York is back to running basketball? You'll find out where we're coming from with that particular perspective here on The Baseline.
Time to break it down to the bone gristle.
We are back. Callie, Warren Shaw, The Baseline NBA podcast. Time now for the breakdown. In our segment of the breakdown, we are going to be talking about the two hottest teams right now in the Eastern Conference, respectively, or coming out of the Eastern Conference. So we're talking about the Brooklyn Nets and the New York Knicks. New York Knicks have been on a pretty impressive run so far. I think it's 6 in a row.
7 as we record.
Seven as we record. We talk about the Brooklyn Nets and we talk about the New York Knicks. And it's ironic because when you look at both of these teams on paper, you can clearly make the argument Brooklyn Nets have the far superior team, but they just don't seem to play that way with consistency night in, night out. However, recently they've kind of changed that narrative and they're leaning on the greatness of Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant, who obviously all they want to do is go out and ball. And in doing so, they are just straight up flaming teams that they play against, averaging like almost 125 points per game during this stretch run of wins that they've been on. And they've been making some crazy freaking, final minute shots, winning it in overtime, doing what great players, you're signing for umpteen millions of dollars are doing, Shaw. So what do we make of this, right? Like the way that the Knicks are going about it is they're leaning on their core players, but collectively as a team, they're getting crazy contributions across the board from the Mitchell Robinsons. It's not just only Jalen Brunson. Julius Randle is having a really impressive season, one which is very reminiscent to the run that he did a few years ago when he was given consideration for MVP when the Knicks were overachieving, so to speak. So we're seeing both of these teams click on all cylinders, but the way that both of these teams are doing it, very, very different.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to lead into it. So we can throw some numbers, at you here. As you alluded to, you'd expect the team with the two phenomenal all-time Hall of Fame level offensive talent, Brooklyn, to be now all of a sudden catching fire offensively. So in this stretch here, now they're second in the league in the last 7 games, second in the league in terms of offensive rating. Conversely, the Knicks are first in the league in defensive rating, on their side of the basketball. Brooklyn has clawed their way up to 13th on the season in terms of defense. And I really just want to point one thing out, right? We talk about Brooklyn a lot over the last couple of years, and it's really always been in the negative. And we're not going to have to rehash or litigate any of that stuff. You know what it is as a fan and listener of the NBA. But it's so nice to be talking about Brooklyn basketball in a positive light right now. And I'm really excited for Jacque Vaughn because I just didn't understand why they didn't give the guy his flowers, let him coach all the searching around and all the BS that they were doing even before that. I just didn't get it. But kudos to that man who just kind of bided his time. They brought in another coach and Fine, he serves as an assistant to that, and then they fired that coach, and they had him on the line, like, hey, you'll be interim. We're always searching for another coach. Ultimately decided against that, and now they're seeing what he can do. So I'm really excited for him on that lens, and I know I took us a little bit on a tangent here, but I just wanted to make sure that that point was made because Jacque Vaughn deserves a lot of credit for staying the course there in Brooklyn.
Well, I appreciate the fact that you did decide to give Jacque Vaughn his flowers. I think he deserves, his flowers because something clearly is clicked in his approach of how to be able to communicate and draw out. Because what I instantly had noticed already from this team was more of the emphasis in playing better defense, right? Like the moment that Steve Nash and the Nets parted ways, Jacque Vaughn seemed to, really kind of hammer the nail here and say, guys, I never question what you can do offensively. I question the fact that we don't give ourselves a chance with all this offense because we're letting these teams basically run all over us, right? And so the fact that there is some kind of emphasis to put forth a better defensive effort, I think is speaking volumes about how Vaughn is communicating to these guys. Because I don't hear a lot of friction with guys and the offensive play calling or, questioning. And again, I don't know if it's because they're just letting Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant cook, but you just see a better defensive effort, and I think he just has more confidence that the offense will flow. The New York Knicks, however, it's a very interesting situation because when you look at the New York Knicks, you would think that every single night it's Julius Randle and he's dominating. It's not really about that. I think Julius Randle in the early stages of the game, he comes in, he imposes his will, he imposes his presence. And then as the game gets down towards the end, you're seeing contributions from Jalen Brunson, from RJ Barrett. And I think it's allowing them to really feel comfortable in, hey, we're going to ride our workhorse to get us to a point where we're in it by the fourth quarter. And then when the fourth quarter hits, we're going to ride the guys who we know are going to be confident in taking that shot. Now, I've seen numerous situations in which the New York Knicks have allowed Julius Randle to handle the ball or take that final shot or whatever the case may be. I'm a little etch on that part of it, but that's fine because if none of those other guys are going, you want a confident Julius Randle doing that, right? Like that to me has always been the problem with the New York Knicks. They can never figure out who they want in the fourth quarter to take those critical shots, whether you make them or miss them. You just want those guys to go in there with the mindset that they're going to take that shot, not pass the ball around, dribble, and then dribble a clock out, and then you don't get a quality shot off, and you don't give yourself or your team a chance to win those basketball games that you worked so hard to stay competitive up until the final seconds. I think you're seeing a little bit more confidence in Thibodeau relying on those guys to figure that out as well, too. And I think that is lending itself to the Knicks on both sides of the basketball. Because even when they take bad shots, they put that much more of a defensive effort to try and get that ball back, to get that extra position, to take that final shot again. And that's giving them this impressive win streak to me from what I'm seeing from them.
Yeah. I'd only say that I think they are maybe a little over reliant, on their top three. But I mean, you have guys like that, and the rest of your roster maybe doesn't rise to that same level of talent. Then I guess that's what Thibodeau just kind of has to do. But as you alluded to, I think, defensively, they've really been able to kind of turn the corner here. Middle of the road offensively, but again, just really locking things down. They're rebounding the hell of the basketball as well. Also,
yes, they are
rebounding, in this.
Mr. Robinson the other night had like 19 rebounds or something like that.
And I mean, again, and him being available, I think is a key to that defense, in a lot of ways as well, too, similar to, the Brook Lopez's and the Robert Williams of the world, for some of the elite teams in the Eastern Conference, right? So Quentin Grimes now finally kind of coming into his own after starting the beginning of the season with some injuries.
I love Quentin Grimes.
He's a fan favorite for a lot of people.
Yeah,
and,
there's a lot of confidence coming from him as a shooter. People
Exactly.
are saying they remind him a lot like John Starks. With the way that he's just coming in. Yeah.
There's some people who I didn't follow Grimes all that closely coming in there, but I didn't understand why. He was, not to say an unmovable piece, but he held up some deals that the New York Knicks were involved in. Like they didn't want to just throw him in. And they're like, oh, there's some value there. So I'm starting to see where, there is the value in Grimes and what he's able to do, especially from the perimeter. So if they can find somebody to be a little bit more consistent offensively, whether that's on the starting line are coming off the bench right now. Quickly is their 4th leading scorer at 9.6. I think then they'll be even a little bit more viable. I'm interested to see if they do ultimately make a move and do anything. But RJ Barrett kind of was struggling with his shot to be in the air, still only shooting 41% from the floor. But now he's starting to come on here as well too, especially in the midst of this winning streak. So Tibbs has got it going. He's not overplaying Randall. He's only at 34 minutes a night, which isn't terrible, considering, Tibbs or what it could potentially be. And again, and the addition of Jalen Brunson has been nothing but masterful. We all knew when we saw that game a couple weeks ago, you and I went to the game. We're like, listen, he really understands how to play. He controls it, doesn't do too much. And while he's not super flashy, he just gets it done and is doing it at a very efficient rate.
I think you raise a really interesting point that's leading me into what I was going to throw out there in the sense that here you are, you're the New York Knicks. You're surprisingly a really good team, right? Collectively. But nobody is like jumping out heads and shoulders because you're still building that core, so to speak, right? Like you're still trying to buy into the idea that Jalen Brunson, you definitely believe that Jalen Brunson is an important piece. You want to buy into the idea that RJ Barrett is the future as well, too. And you also want to buy into the idea that there's some place for Julius Randle with this team, regardless of what we think about last year, even though I know everybody wants to factor that in. But let's just talk about this moving forward. If you look at this team, Shaw, are you someone who's going to feel confident about wanting, Rose and Mills to be buyers come the trade deadline? Because most cases, like if you look at the Brooklyn Nets, you could say Brooklyn Nets should be buyers. Whatever it is that they need to shore up to, to get right with, they need to make that move because you've got two guys, with the window that they have, this is probably the year because they're probably going to go their separate ways come next year. It's an easy call for Sean Marks. Get them whatever they need because this might be the best opportunity to make that run. But you're the New York Knicks. You're like, okay, we don't make this run this year. We still got, another 3-4 years simply because of the extensions and the deals that we've already laid out with these 3 guys. How do you play that? You know what I'm saying? Do you hedge your bets or do you go all in and you say we're going to put those guys around that they need in order for us to try to make this run?
Yeah, what does the market bear? I mean, that's always a question. They have a treasure trove of picks. They're not quite OKC or maybe even New Orleans, but they have a lot of picks that they can do some things with. They obviously are trying to get off the contracts of Evan Fournier and Cam Reddish. So I think from a talent perspective, there's still a lot of interest around the league and see what that could get you back. So I think they have some things at their disposal here. But they're not going to mortgage the future. And while at the beginning of the year, we were all kind of like, damn, maybe they should have made that play for Donovan Mitchell. Now that they've righted the ship some and kind of settled in and have found some semblance of an identity, with that new identity, what do they ultimately need now to add to it? So it's probably shooting, and it's probably, while Emmanuel Quickly is cool and all, but probably somebody to play behind Brunson in a way that can really distribute the basketball. So I don't know if quickly they'd ultimately move in some sort of a piece, but from what I've heard and read, Reddish and Fournier are the biggest names that they're looking to potentially get off of. Hartenstein and Mitchell Robinson are doing fine in the front court, as a duo, splitting those minutes. They don't really want to move off of Quentin Grimes, so that leaves them with very little options, but they do have, draft picks that they can also use as capital and equity to entice a team to maybe get a veteran guy to kind of help them in that side. I don't know if the name that we all hear and wondering what's going to happen with, if Jay Crowder is somebody who they ultimately bring into this situation. Does he fit their scheme and timeline? Right. I don't really know, but I think Newark at least needs to kick the tires on a couple of different ideas here because they have some assets that they could potentially part with without significantly depleting their current roster.
What do we make about Obi Toppin? Right, there's so much been riding on the hype of Toppin, and the idea that he can't play with Julius. We've talked about this as well. They seem to pair each other, and play off of each other pretty good. It's definitely improved, since over the last year and a half. But what do we make about Obi Toppin? Because now with Quentin Grimes, now with the way that this team plays collectively as a whole, there's no more of this. We want to see more of Obi Toppin. We want to see the highlight reel because of what he does, elevating and playing above the rim and things of that nature. Like if it's not going to fit within the scheme of them winning basketball games, New York Knicks fans don't give a damn. So that's how quickly they switched off. Yeah. Not to say that they're against Obi Toppin. What I'm just saying is that where does Obi Toppin really fit in this dynamic of being a part of that whole vibe that the New York Knicks fan base is truly on right now when the team collectively is winning the way that they're doing?
Yeah, I think Toppin is just a rotation player, and you find the minutes for him, where you can. He can spell, obviously, Julius. Maybe in a pinch, you put him at a small ball five. He's been able to shoot the three to some degree, shooting 35%, I think, this year, from the 3-point line. But he's not somebody who should hold up a deal. And if somebody was interested in bringing him on and saying, what, hey, we'd love to take a chance on this young talent, cultivate him in our system. But I don't think he skews right now as somebody who's going to be, a 20-point per game guy, in any stretch of the imagination. He's not on a winning team, and that's not a knock. There's a lot of players in the NBA that are not that type of player. So, but I think all the stuff with Randall, where people were wanting him out of town, you see him kind of revert back to the most improved form. Now you're like, all right, well, maybe we don't need to do that, as you alluded to, and need to force feed Toppin these minutes long term. So I don't think he's particularly good or bad. I think he's just kind of an average NBA player. And with somebody like that, I think you can find somebody at some other minutes. But he is on a rookie deal, so you don't want to just add salary for the sake of adding salary. So I think in this situation, he's fine to just kind of hold on to and see how it goes. But if somebody came calling for the right deal, I think he could be available.
All right, y'all, let's just call that the way that we see it. With the way that the Brooklyn Nets and the New York Knicks are playing, is the rivalry, are we on the precipice of us seeing those great Nets rivalries take place, right? Like, are these games going to be, crucial, tantamount, simply because of where they're positioned, simply because of the way that these teams are winning and what they're going up against? Or, it's just basically great to see them be successful, but when push comes to shove, it will always be the Brooklyn Nets, outclassing the New York Knicks because you got Kevin Durant and you got Kyrie Irving.
Well, I don't think I want to lean one way or the other there. I think all of what you said can make for a nice bit of conversation. These are two teams that are fighting in the Atlantic, two teams that are fighting in the Eastern Conference, specifically chasing right now Boston, with an opportunity to really impact the way that the Eastern Conference is ultimately decided. So New York, they're just going to do it very different ways, as you alluded in the outset. Like, they're just two very, very diametrically opposed teams. And the star power of KD and Kyrie ultimately usually will win out, I think, in a head-to-head matchup. But I think if you can find ways to grind people down into the dust defensively, then, maybe you can eke some things out. So while I don't necessarily think we're in store for a renewed or whatever it is, rivalry, so to speak, I think we're in store for some really competitive and meaningful basketball that we haven't seen both New York teams play in a very, very long time. So the fact that they're on these winning streak is why we're talking about them. And can they maintain this level of viability throughout the course of this regular season, head to head or otherwise, is really the question. And I'm hopeful for both, because the NBA is a better place when New York basketball is good.
Oh, absolutely. Probably my final take on what you said, because what you said was awesome, is whoever it is that really, I guess, puts their fingerprint, so to speak, on the type of team that they're going to be moving forward, I think goes a long way in us previewing how the Boston Celtics will approach if they ever run against these teams in the playoffs. And the way I say that is because the Boston Celtics are one of the few teams that have components of what both of those teams represent. They've got the star power, but they both, both the Boston Celtics collectively has the weaponry offensively and also the mindset defensively to go out and compete against those two styles of teams. And so it'll be very interesting to see which one between each other is going to kind of set the precedent about how they're going to attack the rest of the other teams. Because if you look at the blueprint right now, Cleveland Cavaliers, very similar to the Boston Celtics. Indiana Pacers, very similar to the Boston Celtics. Most of these teams are going to be built very similar to how the Boston Celtics are built, where you have that balance of offense and defense. And it just comes down to whether or not your stars are going to shine, when it matters the most. And I think that's always going to be the big question with the New York Knicks. If you want to really figure out if they got that in them, if they got that oomph in them, let's see what they do against the Brooklyn Nets. Because over the last few years, what do they call it? The Brooklyn Nets has been their stepdaddy. They have been the ones who've been putting them, over the knee and slapping them a few times. Not the Atlanta Hawks, not the Philadelphia 76ers. It's been the Brooklyn Nets. And it's always been a reality check for whether or not the New York Knicks are really serious about putting together a team that's going to be competitive with the rest of those other teams. When the Brooklyn Nets fail, they fail against all of the better teams in the NBA. So it'll be very interesting if they bring themselves back down to earth and compete against the New York Knicks, show them what that star power is made of. And then from there, we can really believe with confidence how they're going to match up against the rest of those other teams that are going to be above them or better than them, possibly by the time we get to the end of the season.
Yeah, and with New York, it's always going to be about, the old adage. Would you rather have kind of that star where the ball is going to him at when the shot clock is winding down or at the end of the game? Well, they have three guys. All the left three have three left-handed guys who that could potentially be. So I think it depends on what side of the fence you're on. Would you rather have the unpredictability of it, so to speak, where you don't know
Right.
if Thibs is going to call the shot for Randall Brunson or Barrett, or kind of the sure-handed aspect of even Kyrie and KD, and both of those guys can hit game-winning shots. We saw Kyrie just hit one in Toronto, not too long ago. And those are, again, elite level offensive players. New York doesn't scare you offensively, while Randall and Brunson have been good. I just don't.
But
they
will make you question. They'll make you question yourselves if they keep hanging around.
Yeah, but you don't feel like, okay, oh my God, we have these guys now, we can't stop them. Like KD and Kyrie literally strike fear into other people's defenses. So, but again, like I said, two very different teams going about it in two very different ways. But I think Thibs has been able to at least figure some things out here on the fly. And Jacque Vaughn, again, as I alluded to, getting Brooklyn to play a certain level of defense with those elite level offensive playmakers that he has already at his disposal to begin with.
Well said, brother. Well said. As they say, church.
Take him to church.
Take him. What is it? We taking him to the Brooklyn Tabernacle and then the New York Methodist. So, awesome show this week, man. And listen, like we said, man, we're really excited to see that the New York Knicks and the Brooklyn Nets are relevant in the conversation of the Eastern Conference when they're in play. And we're not taking anything away from the other teams that are there, but I'm just saying when they are in play, the fervor and the uproar is taken to another level. And we can always appreciate that, especially when the NBA is vibing the way that it is right now, sir.
Yeah, man. Again, I'm just going to reiterate the same point. It's just nice to be talking about these two teams in a positive light, not having to make subtle jokes or sarcasm, or quibs at them. They're playing good basketball, and that's what we want to do here on the baseline. We always want to celebrate things in the utmost ways. So I thought it was important that we had the conversation about these two teams because they have been, the butt of many people's jokes, including our own here. So while maybe I'll go with this kind of parting shot per se, I still feel like something will probably ultimately come up that will prevent Brooklyn from getting over the proverbial hump. That probably will have nothing to do with basketball. But in the meantime, let's enjoy the ride and see where it all goes, for both of these great New York basketball teams.
Last exit, Brooklyn via the Penn Station. Hey, we definitely want to hear from you, man. What are you feeling about the Brooklyn Nets and the New York Knicks, right? Like, are you liking the fact that they are relevant and they're crashing the Eastern Conference party? But definitely get at us, man, at NBA Baseline. Once again, for the Baseline, Cal, Lee, Warren, Shaw, we appreciate you guys, and thank you so much for hopping on board with us this week. We'll catch up with you next time.